but I ended with I do supervision on every other Friday, so I was doing supervision, so I didn't get a chance to finish my game. So next time I got a new game for y'all, since y'all think y'all grown.
Okay, you think you grown with your shoulder out?
That's only because, okay, so then we can say this in terms of travel. That's only because what I don't like about some of these African outfits is that the collar be too wide, and so it's down here. Like, oh, I just got another brush. That's not intentional.
That's pretty though.
What's
Pretty.
funny is the collar will be too wide, but that waist is not. Like,
yeah, I hear you.
That around the behind. That thing.
Oh yeah. They make sure they emphasize that.
So I don't know what that is about. Like, so even when I've had stuff made in Nigeria, I'm like, make sure that they measure it so it's not falling off, particularly because, I am well affronted. So I have to have some, leverage in the front. I can't just be out here. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Ifetayo Ojelade. We are all hanging out here in Atlanta and Muskogee, and we are also in Cherokee territory. And I am joined by my guest today, Dr. Corrie Claiborne, who is Claiborne. I keep saying the Claiborne.
That's
Dr.
all right.
Corrie Claiborne. It's them enslavement ancestors trying to Dr. Corrie Claiborne, who's associate professor of literature at Morehouse College, and then next to her is Dr. Kenja McCray, who's an associate professor in history and is visiting at Georgia Tech University this year. And then below her is our sister, who's an anthropologist, who is also the owner of Grand Tressa Hair Products. That's Antoinette Waithe Nozibele Kuumba. She got 50 million names, and we love her and all of her names. And then our other sister that has 50 million names is Estee Nena Dillard, who is the owner of Endless Spiritual Consulting. She is a Reverend. She is a Ifa and an Olokun priest. And she is just and a queer sexologist. So like all of that. We're going to have this conversation about travel today. And Corrie, I'm going to you first because I want you to set the foundation in thinking about travel. And I think this is really an interesting kind of conversation when we talk about traveling in the African diaspora. And so we can say Africa and the African diaspora, particularly because I think different people have different experiences about travel growing up. And so maybe one of my first questions, I think for everybody, if y'all can just chime in and then we'll kind of come back to you, Corrie, kind of to set the foundation is, in terms of when you were growing up, when you were little, how much did your family travel or talk about travel? Like, what were the messages that you got about what Black people did in terms of travel? So whoever wants to go.
Did you want to start, Dr. McCray? I guess growing up, like most Southern African American people, travel meant going to your grandmother's house in the summer if you live somewhere different, and going to visit your relatives. That was about the extent of travel that, they talked about in my family. However, my mom did put images in my head about going to other places. I was an avid reader, so it was all these wonderful places in the world that I wanted to go and I wanted to experience and just break outside of my little town, because the town was so small that I was like, okay, there are people elsewhere doing other things and I want to see that. So, that was my expression. I made up my mind that as soon as I graduated high school, I was going to leave and I was going to go travel.
I'll jump in. I had an interesting experience because my mother's side of the family is in Alabama. I grew up in Southern Georgia, so we traveled there a lot. And my father was military, but only for the GI Bill for college. But he had this perception, like he had been stationed in Japan. He had been stationed in San Diego, fell in love with it, wanted to live there, came back to Macon, where I was raised because of family. So we would travel. We would travel to the beaches. We would travel to other states. International travel was always something that was on the radar. But it was also with this undertone of like fear that I never quite got explained. So it's like if we would go to Atlanta, which was the big city, but it was only an hour and a half away, my mother would never drive. You know, it was like, we're going to Atlanta. You know what I'm saying? So I kind of grew up with this interesting relationship, but I was never that person. Like I remember when I had my driver's permit, I would be like, I'll drive to Atlanta, you know? So in my family, my grandparents would travel on my mother's side, but then my grandmother on my father's side would not leave the city. Like would not leave the city under any circumstances. So my context for me was very mixed. Like my grandparents were always going somewhere for their anniversary. It was known, it was clear. Everybody in the family knows not to look for them that time of the year. They're going to be in a different part of the country. But we had family too. Like Nozibele said, we had family too that was in New York and Louisville, Kentucky, and a lot of family in the Mobile Bay area. So that's lower Mississippi, New Orleans, lower Louisiana. So like that kind of travel was commonplace and happened all the time. It was nothing for us to load up and have a caravan to go for a state. So I had a mixed experience.
I think I'll chime in next. Same mixed experience. So the element that I think we haven't discussed is the Great Migration. So my maternal family was centered in Birmingham, Alabama, and so was my paternal family. But my maternal family, both sides, but in particular my maternal family left and migrated to the common places: Cleveland, Ohio, Detroit, Michigan, Southern California. So when we traveled as a family, we would load up. And when I say load up, this was a very organized thing. Once people started to migrate, family reunions were a big deal. And everybody knew whatever cycle we were on at the time. Every 4 years, I think it started out with every 4 years. And then every 2 years, more recently, before COVID, we knew family vacation, the big family vacation, the week-long vacation was going to be in one of those locales, if it wasn't in Alabama where we would host it. So we would meet, the family would meet monthly coming up to the travel time, the year of the family reunion, and charter buses. And it was a big deal. I loved it. So yeah, we would, that I think implanted the travel bug in me. But my dad he had been in the military, and his travel tended to be more adventurous and extemporaneous. So it was nothing my parents were divorced by the time I was a tween. And so it was nothing for my visitation weekend or during summer vacation when I was going to stay with my dad for him to say, pack up, we're going to ... like Biloxi, Mississippi, Washington, D.C., Kentucky. I mean, you just never knew. He just loves to travel. But interestingly, I say it was a mixed bag because we didn't travel out of the country. And it wasn't until I got to be a student at Spelman College that I was encouraged to travel out of the country. I think there were some high school trips. In high school, we traveled all the time. I was in the Alabama School of Fine Arts. I was in the dance program. And every year, right after Thanksgiving, we would pack up a bus and go and take the Nutcracker Ballet on the road. And we'd go as far north as Washington, D.C., and as far south as Shreveport, Louisiana. But no out of the country travel. And the trips that were offered by the high school, by that time, my mom was a single mom. We couldn't afford them. But Spelman was great in that they not only encouraged you to travel abroad, but they helped you find financial support. And that's where I got the African diaspora, the international travel bug.
Ife, do you want to go before?
Yeah. So mine is an interesting kind of mixed bag too. One is that the foundations, because I'm from California, and so the foundations of travel in my family is through the Great Migration. So coming out of both Oklahoma and North Carolina, that's how my family ended up in California, where I was born. And so you had like both sides of my family that had migrated. My dad, well, my mother was born in California, but my dad and my both of my maternal and paternal grandparents, and were full grown adults and relocated their entire family to California. And so when I grew up, I had a very kind of interesting existence. And I think it's a different experience growing up in Los Angeles versus growing up in the South, in the sense that LA County is so big and there's so much that you can do in that surrounding area. So lots of times people can do, like, you can hit, amusement parks, and you can do all kinds of stuff. Even just going over like one county, you can do that. And so lots of people spend their entire lives not traveling a lot. We didn't get on planes. I didn't get on a plane until I was an adult, but we did. Y'all gonna talk about this, Corrie? I've told you this before. So by the time I was in high school, we had a what do you call those things? The thing that's in the back of your house, Corrie.
A porch?
No, the thing that you drive. That I
A
can't.
camper.
A camper.
Oh yeah,
We had a
yeah.
camper. I
You
couldn't
did
stand
tell me
that thing.
about that.
And so I could not. I would never get in a camper again. So in terms of like travel, we did travel in terms of like, so I've seen stuff, outdoorsy stuff that I actually love. I just don't like campers. So I've been to Sequoia. I've seen the giant Sequoia trees. I've been to Yosemite. I mean, you name it in terms of like kind of the west coast of the country. I have been, and I have been on lots of camping trips. I've seen like one of the most amazing things that I can remember being a little kid is seeing the Milky Way. So if you are in the mountains at night, the Milky Way is so close because there's no like artificial city lights, and so it literally seems like you can just reach up and touch it. And to me, that was amazing. So for us, like, that was our exposure to travel, but there was never conversations about, and actually, the furthest that we went to New Orleans one time when I was 14. But other than that, we would typically stay on the western southwest of the United States. So, being 1 or 2 states over of California. But we didn't get, like, I didn't hear any kind of conversations about like traveling out of the country. Like, it just didn't even seem like that was an option, if you will. In terms of travel.
And it's interesting because everybody has sort of spoken about that, like there are these 2 phases, or if your parents are divorced like mine, you had 2 different like travel itineraries. Like one was like, yeah, we about to go everywhere, and the other parent was like, we about to stay right in this little square and call it a day. And I was very similar in that sense. Although I always like to say a PK, a professor's kid. So that means that in the same way, I went where my parents went for research, for when they were still in grad school, because I was born when they were in college. So, I mean, I lived very early in my life in Durham, North Carolina, in New Hanover, New Hampshire, in St. Louis, Missouri, in Danville, Virginia. Finally arriving in South Carolina when I was like in late elementary school. And by then I was just like, oh, I'm not supposed to be in one place, right? Like I was convinced that we were nomads. And even, when it came to, so my mother, sort of was not the traveler. She was from South Carolina, pretty much stayed in South Carolina, even though we would travel in South Carolina. And sometimes we do road trips to see family who had spread out. Oklahoma, like talk about driving to Oklahoma, to New York, to like everywhere else, like in the country we would drive. My dad, however, he was very much a Renaissance man. He had the camper, right? He was the one where, he was like, we are going to see everything. But I remember even at the point where it was visitation in South Carolina at the time, you could get a license when you were 13 because you worked on a farm, quote unquote. But my mom was like, y'all just go get a license. And I remember at a certain point when my sister was 13 and I was 12, my mom stopped driving us to Virginia to see my dad. So she was like, you gonna take this gas car? We had that little, what is it, the Rad McNally Road Atlas, and you gonna get there and drive to your father's house in Virginia, right? So it'd be me. I would drive when I was 12. Don't tell nobody. Although I wasn't legal. So we did that until we graduated from high school. So we would drive back and forth because my mom wasn't driving us nowhere. And it was always one of these kind of things. And people are like, well, this is before cell phones. What if the car breaks down? What if you lose the gas card? What if you don't take the gas card? What did y'all go do for food? We got all that food on the gas card because my mom did not give us any money. When I tell you, it was like, y'all just go straight. No stop.
How long was it?
Except for gas and keep going. She was like, you could pack some food. That was in the days when you packed food. You did not stop for food. You packed food. So we packed food, but if we wanted to buy food, we had to get it on our Texaco gas card because that was literally the only tender we had. We had no cash, no nothing, no phone, no whatever.
How long was the
But
trip?
I remember being just feeling like, unlike my people of our age, feeling like I could go anywhere and handle myself. Like I could be anywhere and know how to get to one of my parents' house, figure out how to get home. And that was always my dad's thing. You need to know how to get home. And one of his things when he took us out into the woods, we were mountain climbing. I don't know what we were doing, but I was always saying, Dad, well, which way is it to the car? Which way do we come? And he got frustrated with me. I remember he just spun me around in a circle. He was like, okay, find your way back to the car. And I was like, we literally were in there for hours because I had no idea. I was like, this looks like mountains. It looks all the same. And he was like, well, how will you know where you are? And I was like, I don't know. He was like, well, look, what size does moss grow on? I was like, literally, I have never worried about some moss in my life. How about what way does the stream flow? Like all this kind of stuff. But eventually I got to the road and I knew how to follow the highway back to where we pulled into the parking thing. But he was like, you need to always find your way. And I remember when I eventually went elsewhere, I could always find my way. Like people were always amazed, even in countries where I didn't speak the language. I'd figure I would know where I came from and I would know how to get back, right? Like I would notice everything around me. I could use the metro in Paris with very little understanding. So I have always been an adventurous traveler, so no matter where I go.
So Corrie, when you guys were doing the trip, how long did it take for you to drive from South Carolina to Virginia?
About 5.5, probably. Yeah.
So y'all was 12 or 13 driving.
And my brother was 8. So he was in the back. It was my sister, me, and my brother. So, yep.
What? Wait, there's more? Because everybody they're familiar with driving earlier. I don't know if you're in Virginia, that big downtown bridge. My brother was driving us over that huge single lane main bridge when he was about 12, and it was just like, oh, okay, just drive.
See, we were Western Southern Virginia, so where Danville is, and then later on, my father lived in Harrisonburg, where James Madison University is. So we didn't get up the rest of 85 or even 75. Like we kind of stayed, or 95. We stayed like it was pretty country. My mom was like, ain't nothing over there. So unless you hit a deer or something. And she was like, call collect if you get in some trouble.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that experience, at least with the driving, because they taught us to drive when we were around 12 too. And now we can legally get a permit until 15, but by the time you hit 12, you would learn in the fields on the other side of the tractors. Like it's just land and go out there. And I think about solo travel too. When I was 10, I went to visit my aunt that's in Chicago. And I went by myself.
They were just like, bye. Like, see you. Good luck.
But my mother would not do it, which is what's interesting because my mother absolutely doesn't, like right now, my mama doesn't have a passport. Like, my mama's not going anywhere. She's like, you want to go way over there? And which I think is the interesting thing about the way travel gets talked about.
Right.
Because it's talked about as this kind of like otherworldly thing by the same person who put me on that plane alone.
Right.
And that's the part that I wanted to point out is because in here, I'm thinking about like the psychological impact overall of Black people traveling. So when we first started talking, I went back to Lovecraft Country and, you know, them trying to travel and the impact that had on them and using the, you know, Green Book. And so I wonder how much of some of our older generation not necessarily getting out of their city has to do with some of the traumatizing experiences that they had with traveling and how they talk about travel.
Well, I feel like it's kind of interesting though. And Sam and I were talking about this a little bit, that it seemed like it skipped a couple of generations, right? Because if you go back at the turn of the century, those people were gone, right? Like they had a sense too. You know, I don't even know if I could say this is the Marcus Garvey generation because it preceded him, right? Like where people right after slavery were clear that they were leaving the United States. Like they were just like, we're about to go, you know, even in slave revolts. I remember Denmark Basin was like, oh, we gonna steal these ships and ride to Haiti. And, you know, Blake, which is, you know, sort of a science fiction written during the time of slavery. But he's like, you know, again, we're going to Cuba. We're going to the Caribbean. And even at the turn of the century, I mean, the great artist Edmonia Lewis, right? Like her life so she wants to be this artist. And she's like, I can't, as a woman coming out around the Civil War, right? Like I can't just be painting stuff, right? Like it just creating art. And it's kind of the wherewithal to know you had to go and what the rest of the world was. And so I think that for us, as Jim Crow set in, as segregation set in, we got more afraid, right? You know, my family was one of the stops on the Green Book in Danville, right? Like they had a boarding house that people could come to see, right? Could come stay. And a lot of times teachers and like single people, I never understood why you could, once you got married, you had to stop being a teacher, but that's a separate conversation. It's like, so they be somebody where they get there and then you lose your job. Like, I just don't understand. Women lost their job, men didn't, but whatever. But yeah, so they had a boarding house, they had all this other kind of stuff, but it seems like right around the 1950s, 60s, not that they didn't travel, but it's like it wasn't the same because I feel like earlier they were thinking about how we go and get on the steamer ship and go somewhere. You know, one of my favorite books by Pauline Hopkins, which is written in 1902, is called One Blood, but it's kind of about this dude who he thinks he's not African. He's like, I don't care anything about Africa. And he ends up going on this trip to Ethiopia thinking he's going to go there and steal artifacts to bring them to the United States to sell to white people, right? He's like messed up in the head. But when he goes there, he kind of figures out, he's like, oh no, these are my people. We all one blood, i.e. the name of the book, One Blood. So you have people talking about this in 1902. You know, Mary McLeod Bethune talks about, you know, wanting to go to Sierra Leone and, you know, start teaching there. But she gets married and can't go. So, but it's one of those kind of things that becomes an interesting narrative. And it is in the 60s that world gets smaller. And you also think about all of these Black people who would own these beach houses and lake houses, had beach property, which was segregated because white people didn't want it. That gets smaller. And so I think our kind of notion of travel gets more limited as the time goes on, because I think it was really large too earlier.
The other thing I think about with what you're saying too, Corrie, is the role of just racism in the logistics of travel. Because I know that's what I remember, particularly when traveling. I mean, well, obviously it was all domestic, but particularly traveling in the South. You know, like we had to always pack our food, you know, there was going to be an auntie that had a bathroom in the car, some kind of setup.
Well, it's called the woods. It's called you stop and go in the woods. That's what we.
I mean, yeah, like I was taught to do that too, but no, like literally, like sometimes if they were afraid of stopping at all,
that's true,
or not sure that they were going to have shoulder access, like, you know, there was a situation they would set up, and you know, you would have to go in the car. And I remember distinctly traveling for a funeral and going through Mississippi and having to use the bathroom. And it was myself and my mother and another woman. It was just the three of us in that car. And the fear that I remember being able to sense of like, get in the bathroom, come out of the bathroom, and we're leaving. Like, we're not getting gas. We're not doing any of that. We're doing it because there wasn't a safe shoulder where we were on back roads. So I think also too that that role of being able to move freely and safely and to do so with your children. And so even in ways that I think, you know, I felt the freedom to do so. I just don't think that my mother or her generation experienced the same thing.
And Jamila and Nozibele, I know you were going to say something.
You can go first, Jamila.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think we should distinguish between leisure travel, like missionary or like religious travel, and pleasure travel and business travel. In a way, I agree, Corrie, when you're talking about the exodusters, when you talk about immigrationism with an E, there was an impulse to travel with African Americans, particularly coming out of enslavement when Jim Crow set in, you know, post Reconstruction. But if you look at the details, those same impulses, if you're talking about immigrationism, the exodusters, those same impulses that pushed them to travel are keeping people in place, right? The violence, the lack of access to equal education, the economic exclusion, political disfranchisement were reasons why that stimulated people to travel, like you said, to Liberia, you know, Cuba, all kinds of places, Central and South America, and things were just that bad.
They were that bad, and that's another thing that I wanted to talk about, because what made me think about this topic was, you know, the pandemic plus, you know, white people run amok. Before that, I mean, there were so many conversations at the time about, okay, where are we going, right?
Yeah.
Like this kind of idea that now it's the time for Black people to leave perhaps the United States or set up our own thing within the United States. I heard those kind of conversations again. It's like, what land we buying, you know, who's going to do what in this commune? Like what skills y'all bringing, you know, if we had to sort of separate out. And I was like, you know, I do think we are living in a time that is much like the turn of the sort of 20th century. Like, I feel like Reconstruction era or the Native period can teach us a lot, because the same things that they're going through, disenfranchisement, this sort of rise of white supremacy, you know, people wanting to push back on rights because they're afraid of all these people coming or being here and deciding who's going to be a citizen, all this other kind of stuff, dealing with illnesses, right? If we think about even up to the first Spanish flu, it's like all this stuff is happening. And people have to feel, I think they felt much the same way that we do now, right? There's a lot that we can learn from that time period. And I always think that, people look at this, you know, the nadir period and say that this is what happened, but there are ways people found escape and joy and all of those kind of things. And I started looking at that. Like I said, all of these, like Pauline Hopkins in 1902 writing about this, the New Negro, half of that was about like capping off this, you know, desire of artists and writers to move to Europe and around World War I, right, to move to Europe. But people started imagining, okay, what if we're not here? What if we go somewhere else? Right.
And what you're saying, Corrie, is, I mean, so it's interesting to hear from a literature perspective and from a historic perspective, because y'all are connecting those two things together in terms of it seems like everything in our experience is like this tension between the ways in which that we retain our joy, autonomy, and sense of agency, and the ways in which people try to oppress it. I'm curious, Nozibele, you were going to say something around this. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to speak to some of the violence that people had mentioned earlier, because there are two things actually. One, in terms of, I remember distinctly when we had to travel and we drove with my grandmother. She had her little 48. It had a white pearl handle that she kept in the glove compartment that she was always on the ready with. So she was like, anytime somebody looked like they were stopping or looking at us wrong, she was like, baby, get ready to get that from my glove box. You know what I mean? So you had to have those, you had to make sure that you were protected. But I also remember how my grandmother was defiant in some ways, and she claimed her agency, because when we were riding from Virginia to North Carolina or South Carolina, and we would see either cornfields or cotton fields or stuff like that, she would stop the car, open the door, and tell us to grab everything that we want. And she was like, I was like, what? I was like, this ain't ours. She was like, well, they forced us to pick it at one time, so we just going to grab everything and then just put in the car. So that was her, the first person who taught me reparations. But even with the cotton, to this day, if I see a cotton field, I would stop and I would grab some and put it on my ancestor altar, my ancestor shrine, to help us remember that. And so that was the one thing I talked about. Some of the ways that we reclaimed our agency are the ways that I know that. But another thing, because I'm from a military town, a lot of the men in my family traveled because they were in the service. So they went into the military from all the way back from, World War I. They would go to these places. That's why my name is Antoinette, because I had an uncle who traveled to France and he loved it. So he came back and he was like, okay, so that's why. And my brother was named Anthony because someone else went to Italy, and, so on and so forth. So they went to these places and they brought back these tales of travel. And I think it's interesting that the men picked up on this travel, and it inspired them to go out or join the military or go wherever they needed to go. But the women just stayed home and enjoyed, I guess, the stories of the travel or the benefits of the travel. So we should also talk about the gender aspects of it.
Oh, definitely.
How to stay safe, the things that keep us homebound, because we're supposed to be homebound and men are expansive.
Yeah, I never even thought about that in terms of the military piece, because so like part of my family, the men in my family, well, there's a kind of a Navy line that goes through my family, and so several of them, of course, served in Vietnam. So several of them had gone and traveled all over the world, but the women hadn't. So when I think about it, the folks that did international travel in my family were the men.
And that's really interesting too, because after my uncle was, I forgot what war he was in, and he was in the military, he joined the Foreign Service. So partly the rest of his life was spent going to different places, living in Thailand and Africa. And I remember this is like the wild thing that happened. So my grandmother's house, one day, this man just comes and knocks on the door, and he's like, his name was Jonathan, and he was from Sierra Leone, where my uncle had been in the Foreign Service. My friends used to joke that my uncle was a spy. They were like, well, what does he do? We ain't really sure what his job is. He just be going places, in the dead of night, but whatever. So this guy came from Sierra Leone, where my uncle had been doing whatever he does in the Foreign Service. And he told my grandmother, he was like, oh, I met your son. And he was just telling about how they had all these conversations, blah, 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 blah. And he said, well, if I ever find myself in the United States, that I should come and look him up. So this guy traveled all the way from Sierra Leone. He had nothing. He had no luggage. He had nothing. He had scraped up every little cent that he had. And all he had was my grandmother's name and the address, because that's the address he would send letters. That was my grandmother's address. And he was like, well, I want to go to school. Don't you know my grandmother let that man move in with her? She figured out a way to put him in school for engineering, right? Like it was like literal. It was like literally like, oh, he said that I should look him up, and my grandmother took that to mean like, oh, this man is here. I'm supposed to help him, and he literally considered my grandmother like his mother. I mean, he had kids, got married. They would use, so whenever she used to talk about her kids, she's like, I have 7 kids, and she would include him in her children. And he literally came up out the night knocking on the door. And I don't even know how he got from Sierra Leone to Florence, South Carolina, because there was no, I mean, he had to take a couple of buses. Like, it was not like a straight plane over. But I was just like, oh my God, my uncle was out in the world. And then even when my grandmother talked to him, she was like, oh, you sent Jonathan here? He's like, I didn't send him here. I didn't even know he was, I'll handle said, if you ever in the United States. I didn't think it was going to be something like that. But it was one of those kind of things where, you know, my uncle was having all these wild experiences, but it was touching us, right? Like I gained an African uncle, you know, out of, you know, some conversation my other uncle had when he was abroad. So definitely.
Wow. What is the place that you have been to, this is for anybody, that you've been to that you were surprised that you enjoyed? I know what my place is.
Surprised that I enjoyed it all, or more I enjoyed it more than I thought?
However you want to answer it. However. Yeah.
My place would be Namibia.
Oh, I want to go to Namibia. That's like on
Namibia.
Mm-hmm. I went
my top 6.
And yeah, it was on my list, but I'm going to Namibia thinking I'm gonna slide over from South Africa.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like we're gonna see the animals, it's gonna be cool, and I'll check it off the list and it's done. Namibia was so peaceful. It was like we got out of the airport and I looked at Shay and I was like, I want to cry because there is just something about this land, and it's like baboons on the side of the road playing with each other, and I'm sitting here like something is different here. And so that was very surprising to me. So I definitely will be going back to Namibia because that 4 or 5 days was just not. It just wasn't enough. It was just beautiful, and the people were nice, and it was nice. It was just it was wonderful. So my place would be Namibia.
My place would be, I would say Germany. Listen, because being the African nationalist that I am, I know anywhere I traveled in Africa, I was going to love. Okay. So we're talking about the places. So I think that was it because I'm not a cold weather person. I didn't speak the language, but the scenery, the food isn't really good compared to some other European countries, but I really, really enjoyed my stay there. I enjoyed the people, and interestingly enough, I like the crazy language. Now, we could do the flip side, where to say an African country that I thought that I would love and I was shocked by, but I'll wait for everybody else to talk about what they.
I didn't even think about that because something popped in my head. But what about you, Ijamile and Corrie? Places that you were shocked by?
I think I didn't think I would enjoy Princeton, New Jersey. It seemed distant, like nobody in my family, my immediate family, thought about it, talked about it. I didn't think it was anywhere anyone I knew would ever end up. Even as I met some colleagues, fellow historians who were there in school, it still seemed distant to me. So when my daughter got in and we started to go there, like our first time going there, I don't know what I had in my mind besides distant, but when I got there, I was like, wow, this is a lot more diverse than I thought it would be. It's cool. It's, a college town.
Pretty.
And then when it was time to go, for move-in day, make runs to Walmart and stuff, I was like, oh, this is just a place. Like, it's cool, and accessible. And we took my mom, and she was like, I just never thought I would be there. I never thought I would go there. Show me Michelle Obama's former dorm room. It was hilarious.
That's funny. Oh gosh. What about you,
So
Corrie?
I have two places.
Uh-huh.
So one was Dubai.
Oh yeah, you did say, yeah.
Yeah, because for various reasons. One, I'm not big on people putting, all these laws on what women can do that seem somewhat arbitrary. I will say that, because they are not in the Quran. It's just stuff that y'all made up. So there's that. And then also, just the sort of rampant capitalism. But I actually like it. So I don't know what that says about me, about rampant capitalism and, about like rules for women. But I was surprised that, the people are very, very nice. There are not a lot of native UAE people there. There's a lot of Europeans, obviously, a lot of Africans. But it is a safe country. And part of that is because it's also a Muslim country. Like, you are not going to worry about people stealing from you or, they can't even charge interest on stuff, right? Like, it was so fascinating to me because they're like, usury is like a sin. And so there would be like everything 0% interest, zero. I was like, why can't we have this in the United States? They're like, oh, they figure out how to get you on the come up so they don't have to charge you interest on getting a loan for stuff. But it just felt like that there was a history in the just Arabian Peninsula that a lot of Black people don't talk about that's related to us. And I found that really fascinating. So that would be one. And the other would be Turkey, which I liked a lot too. Again, same thing. But it was really beautiful, actually.
Oh, okay. So I'll say too, Turkey. I agree with you. I was surprised. I didn't plan on it. Was just a stopover, and I was like, "Yo, bet I'm coming back to Turkey." So Turkey is cool. I think people sleep on Turkey. You just got to stay away from the Syrian border right now. But once you stay away from the Syrian border, you straight. Like if you're in Istanbul, that is cool. Just kind of being in the midst of the old Ottoman Empire and looking at the culture, because it's very much of an African presence. So Alethea is saying that she likes Turkey as well. Yeah. Like everybody that I've ever talked to, likes Turkey, and then the food, so it'll be like you'll be able to eat. So Turkey is good. The other one, and Corrie, you know this because I was completely shocked. So I'm always interested in going where our people are. And I've never been. So been to the continent of Africa in several countries, been to Central and South America. So I'm just like, if there's African people, I want to go. So I never was interested in Europe at all. And I went to, so it's actually two places in Europe. So I went to Switzerland, which I liked, Geneva. I was very surprised. It's very expensive, but I really enjoyed Switzerland. And my biggest surprise, and Corrie kept warning me, she's like, you're going to like it, is when I went to Paris. And I was like, yo, Paris is dope. And I didn't realize that there was such a strong African presence in Paris. And so everything that we did, like the first night we ate at a Malian restaurant. The second night it was Senegalese. The third night we went into an Indian restaurant, and it was me and another sister. We was only people of African descent there. So the Indian people was happy to see us. And by the end of the night, they was like giving us drinks and all kinds of stuff and giving us free stuff. And so it was amazing. Paris was... And then even like, I remember going to one, I forget, I think it was like the 18th arrondissement. And so it's an area town. And I get off the subway station and walk up. So it's just like New York with the underground subway. And you walk up and I come out and it looks like I'm in Harlem, except everybody's speaking French. Like it was Black people everywhere. So I absolutely loved Paris. Like I would go back numbers and numbers of times.
And I think that's one of the greatest misconception. The largest French-speaking country is in Africa, which is the DRC. It has more French speakers, and Africa as a whole has more French speakers than anywhere else in the world, right? We're talking about millions and millions more. I mean, there's something like 18 or 19 countries where French is the first or second language in Africa. 18 countries, right? So whenever I say to people, the reason why Paris is Black, it's because, you know, of the footprint they left in Africa, and they sort of all coalesce, and plus all of, you know, French Guyana and the overseas departments, Tahiti, you know, the rest of the Caribbean, and they all come to one place. So I was like, it's going to end up being African, because if you get in a conversation with people, you'd be like, oh, you're from, well, your family is from. It's kind of like their great migration story as well. So
yeah, because everybody that I met was of African descent. I mean, they were continental Africans in terms of African descent, but they were all like from a particular country,
right,
and they had migrated to the continent. Or, you know, Kevi that you introduced me to,
yeah,
brother that does
tours, Paris Noir, huh?
Yeah, Paris Noir, and he does tours. He's from Martinique. He does amazing tours about the Black presence in Paris.
And I think it's really interesting, because when you talk about different European countries culturally, French people are French above all else, right? Yeah. So when they went to colonize, unlike the Europeans or unlike the Spanish, they really wanted to indoctrinate you into their culture and their belief system. So it's only natural that after a while, this would be the place where you go to, right? That you would migrate to, because you are, for all intents and purposes, French. Right. You know, as opposed to Europeans, like English people, they weren't interested in making sure that you were British. They wanted you to know or behave like a British person, but they didn't want you to think that you were British.
Yeah, right? They never wanted you.
Yeah, they never wanted you to think.
Whereas Paris is, France is the exact opposite. You cannot say you are from somewhere else. Like, you cannot say you're African, Franco-African, or
right. You're French.
You just have to be French, right? Yeah. Like, it's actually against the law to claim an ethnic designation on anything, which I feel like, okay,
isn't that crazy?
Because in England, I had this conversation on Twitter, because this professor was talking about, he's in, I forgot, somewhere in the UK, like maybe England or Scotland or Ireland, and he was like, he saw another Black person, and he kind of gave him the head up, and he got ignored. He was like, what? Like, he's just not going to acknowledge my presence. We the only two brothers in here. And I was like, no, it is like that. I don't know what it is. Like, Black people in the UK do not speak. They do not acknowledge your presence. It could be you and one other dark dot full of a room, and they're just going to be like, da, 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 da. It freaked me out the first time, because I'd only been to France, where they do speak, they do acknowledge, they do help. But it's like in England, it's kind of like, we trying to act like we blending in. Like, we don't want to even acknowledge other Black people. But he was like, I ain't never been anybody. He's like, you don't have to have a conversation. Well, you ain't gonna give me a head nod? I was like, no, they ain't gonna give you a head nod.
Let me tell you, British sensibilities, they don't even give themselves a head nod, right? If you start taking a look at British culture and the real proper, the real prim, the real, I'm not going to make any waves. So in a way, they kind of adopt that. Scottish, I don't know, because the Scottish culture is a little bit different. I don't
remember where he was, but we were talking about the differences between, like, even Germany, but Germany and France and like places where if you see another Black person, you don't have to be from the same country. You don't even have to verbalize it, but you're gonna be like, hey.
And so I would like you all to speak on this, because one of the things, because when I left, I was about 17, right? And the biggest thing that I encountered when I went over to Europe, that coming from the South, I was discriminated against more so, not because I was a person of color, but because I was an American. So I don't know if you all had that same experience. Like, whenever I had issues with people who were foreigners, it was, like rude American, entitled American, greedy American, because of the way that I moved through those particular spaces as an American. And even though I was African, I still felt some sense of entitlement that I'm an American, I have my rights, I don't care what you say, this is how it's supposed to be. And it was a different experience.
Did you realize you shaking your head? You had that experience? I'm sorry, go ahead. Estee. Yeah.
Oh, Estee.
No, go ahead.
I want to hear from both of y'all.
Yes, I had that experience as an exchange student in Jamaica. And I mean, remember Corrie, Nozibele said she was 17. So yeah, I was what, like 19, 20. And I did not, because my family didn't travel abroad, the men did for the military. And that was a lot of times experiences that they didn't want to discuss. They were so harrowing because they saw, most of them saw combat and stuff. And my granddad, my dad, they didn't want to talk about those things. So it wasn't, like they were, there were people in my family who were like, and avoid being an ugly American. In particular, I think my grandmother had the experiences that you're talking about, where it's difficult to travel, you're traveling through sundown towns and, you're afraid. And so she was like, no, don't travel. It's scary. It's a big world. You're a woman, you're a Black woman, don't travel. So their response was like, oh my God, you're going to Jamaica. You're going halfway around the world. Oh my goodness. Why? And, no talk about, oh yeah, and avoid being the ugly American. So I went with another Spelman exchange student, and she's the first person while I'm there acting out saying, I know my rights. She's like, avoid being an ugly American. I was like, what's that? Too late. Okay, well, too late.
That's too late.
Yeah, and so I got that a lot, and it was a real learning experience. I learned a lot from that.
Estee, I know that you have a hard stop at 1:00. I want to get you in your comments about this.
I do. So I have a couple. With the American piece, I experienced that most in China, which was also very kind of disorienting. And I was young when I went to China too. I think I was 23 when I went to China. But in China, it was very strange because they're not Africans in China. So they would hear me speak and know that I was American, but they would see my skin and assume I was African. So I got different treatments based on how they engaged with me. So like if they just saw me, I remember this very distinctively at the Great Wall, because the Great Wall is folks from everywhere coming. And so they were like, oh my God, you have Black skin. Can I take a picture? Can I touch it? And I was like, huh? Excuse me. And I mean, that probably happened. I don't know. I was probably there for 5 or 6 hours. So that probably happened 12 times. I mean, it happened over and over and over again, trying to walk the Great Wall. And I was with a Spelman sister of mine, and we were tourists, but we were there together. And she's darker skinned than I am. So they were both like, and y'all brown, like, what is that on your face type situation. So that was very problematic. And the other side of it was, they would hear me speak and they would be like, oh, you're American. And their disposition, how they treated us, all of that would change. So I definitely had much more success in places where I knew to get ahead of that. The other thing that I was going to say was to the kind of cultural conversation that we were having. We were talking about ethnic groups and culture, is I just want to talk too about sexual culture. As a queer person, traveling as a queer person is a very different experience. Especially to Muslim countries or to countries where it can be dangerous or where you have to be careful. I don't want to say dangerous because I solo travel all the time. So does my partner. But, where you have to be careful as a woman doing solo travel. And so almost to your earlier question, Nozibele, about unexpected experiences to the negative, that for me was in Egypt. I just knew I was going to love Kemet. Kemet was at the top of my list, and spiritually it was very powerful. Now I'll say that. So if I was inside of something like, a tomb or the pyramids, or like if I was actively engaged, it was incredible. I mean, definitely still at the top, because Black people are amazing. Like what our ancient ancestors did in Kemet is unmatched. And when I wasn't, culturally, it was very difficult to navigate. They don't know they're Black. They don't think that they're, it's like they think they're African at the bottom of a list of other things that are more important. So it's like, yeah, we're African, but we're Middle Eastern, and we're also Nubian, and we're also like, and it's so that part is very disorienting. And so it's almost like they have this allure as well, particularly around African Americans. And so for us, I traveled with my partner. We had to be closeted for our safety, and experience still some discrimination, just because of people being suspicious or asking questions because we were there together, because we were there alone, because we were there without a man, because we were staying in the same room, those kinds of things. So I think that the cultural piece is very important to name and to prepare yourself for, to know how to research, to know things. I think things that saved us is that we had done a lot of research on the front end, and we both are pretty well traveled. So, you know, we knew how to dress, we knew how to navigate conversation. We, you know what I mean? We had some experience, but if that had been, you know, myself 15, 20 years ago, yeah, it would have been a problem.
Yeah. And I know you got to go, Estee. So I know you have to jump off right at 1:00. So we're sending you kisses.
So real quick before you go, Estee, where is one place you want to go? Right?
Yes.
Where is still on this list that you have that you feel like that's going to be the next place?
Oh, that's hard. I think right now it's Anguilla St. Martin. Just because of the African connection there, and that will probably be at the top. Now, Ghana, I'm a Ghana stan. So Ghana is my favorite place in the whole wide world. So
because you ain't been to Senegal. I haven't been to Senegal.
Senegal's on the list too. Senegal's on the list. Benin's on the list, and they're at the top. Actually, Turkey is on our family list. That's my partner and I want to go to Turkey. So I like Europe. I had a good time, but I'm like Ife. Wherever Black people are is, and I didn't find the Black people in Paris, so I gotta go back because I didn't have a good.
Oh yeah,
was
they got Black hair.
2023, we're gonna do a tour.
So
you
just gotta ask.
Like, where are the Negroes? You know what I'm saying? But
they're a little. They do have their own arrondissement. 2018.
Yeah,
right? Like you gotta.
I went with the wrong set of folks, so I gotta go. Yeah, so I will be definitely going back. But I really wanna Anguilla. I would love to immerse myself there. And Brazil, I haven't made it to either. So those are probably my top two.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Brazil clearly, because Corrie and I were there, but we're gonna go 2023. So we're gonna cross our fingers that we're not gonna have a pandemic anymore, and we're gonna do the African tour of Paris because they even have a little Africa in Paris.
They do.
So yes,
it was like, ain't nobody told me.
I also went to Europe a lot first because of access and flights and pricing. So I went there a lot in my early 20s around China too. So I also didn't know better because I was planning for myself. But I was like, where are the Black people? I don't know how to find them. Like
they were everywhere. Like if you know where to go, like I was lucky because Corrie had already prepped me, and then
maybe I got to be the Negro guide to go into France.
Yeah, well, I'm telling you, Ghana for me is like, and now I really, really, really love South Africa. So definitely South Africa is a close second. I love South Africa, but Ghana, I cried when I got there and I cried when I left. Like Ghana was a return home and everybody looked like people I know. Like I was walking around like that's so and so and so and so, that's so and so and so. You know? So I think and everybody I think that can make it happen should go to the slave castles, go have that kind of seminal experience because that framework is going to shift and transform you just by putting your feet on the soil.
Yeah, Alethea just made a comment that she said Ghana feels like home too. Okay, you got a hard stop. I wanted to answer the question. Take care, sis. I wanted to answer the question, and I know we got to stop. So I had two experiences. I wouldn't say I've ever had an ugly American experience. I think I was a little more mature when I started traveling internationally. So, and I always have this thing about not wanting to be seen as an arrogant, ugly American. So I try to tamp that down. But so I would call this a naive American experience. I was in Panama, and sometimes men smile at you and they be trying to flirt, and I smile back. I'm not gonna say anything, but like, hey, you smiling at me, I smile back. So I'm walking down the street in Panama, walk past this guy, he's smiling at me. I'm like, hey, and I don't say anything, but I do smile at him. And I go into a store and they didn't have what I wanted. So I leave out and I walk past and he's looking at me again. And so I just turn and I smile at him again. Don't ever do that if you're in a country with Latino folks, because what I didn't know as a naive American is that what I did is I gave the man an invitation, because me smiling back at him means I'm interested, and I was not at all interested in him. So the next thing that I knew, he was following me and he wouldn't stop. And so, I was thinking, okay, I just ignore him and he would just stop. And I literally had to run across it was at least a 4 or 5 lane highway. I had to run across that highway, run across the bridge to get away from him. And I was going into a mall. And at that point, I was starting to panic. And I'm not fluent in Spanish at all, but I can survive. And I was there by myself. And so I was trying to figure out how to say I need help. And I couldn't because I was panicking so much. And finally, I got in a mall and was able to kind of lose him. But I was like, wow. And so the kind of the hilarious part is when I got back from that trip, my Uber driver I think he was Dominican, if I remember correctly. I'm almost positive he was Dominican. And I told him about my experience. And he says, you gave him an invitation. And I was like, what? He was like, you were saying like you're interested in him. And I was like, oh. So when I've talked to Afro-Latino men since then, they're saying like, as an American, you may smile back at someone. That culturally is a different experience for men in Latin America. So I was like, all right, so I will never do that again. The other thing that I've had an experience with is, and this has happened in airports, and it's only happened with other women where they're not necessarily white. I remember being in Turkey airport. So it's like a olive skinned person, like let's say she's Arab or Turkish or something like that. And the person just ignored me and my family, like I wasn't there. And so this, I guess now I think about it, this was kind of like an ugly American. So the lady just walked in front of me in line. And I was like, and I walked back in front of her and she did it again. And I was like, oh, you're not about to get in front of me. So that is kind of one of the spaces I think where my ugly American comes out. Like if you're going to try to like act crazy and discriminate against me, I'm going to let you, that's not about to jump off here.
And it's so interesting everybody's saying this, because usually people think I am not American. Like, I don't care how I sound, because I think I sound like a quintessential whatever. Everybody will swear I am not from America, that I'm trying to put on an American accent. So like, for example, even in India, they're like, they teach people how to, in call centers, how to sound more American. So they're just like, are you from Bangladesh? Did you just learn how to, speak like an American? Like they never assume, even when I say I'm from the United States, they don't believe me. So it's exactly the opposite. Because this one guy was like, Suriname? I was like, I don't even know what Suriname is. Like, I got Suriname. I did get Bangladesh one. Somebody asked me if I was from the Cook Islands. I was like, look here, y'all picking places that maybe if I had gone there, I would know Fiji, the Cook Islands. This is when I was in Australia. So I guess, I don't know what Cook Islanders look like, but maybe they look like, well, I know Fijians kind of have Afro hair, but I was just like, okay, I'll take it. But nobody believed I was from the United States. Not a single person.
Wow. So. And I had a similar experience in Africa, and that was one of the things that made me really, really feel overcome, because no matter where I went, people said that they can look at me and place me in different places. And then I was like, oh, you're from here, or you're from here. You know, especially when I was in Africa, tall and skinny, people just automatically assume I was Ethiopian or from Eritrea, somewhere like that. But, you know, definitely in Europe, they kind of like spotted it. And to your point, Ife, I think the smiling thing is universal, because that can happen here as well. I remember in college smiling at somebody walking from the West End MARTA to the AUC and got followed from the West End MARTA all the way to the AUC. Then we're getting followed from Beaufort Highway when I came out here for the very second annual Malcolm X Festival to the West End Park. Someone caught a bus, a train to 5 Points, then from 5 Points to West End, and walk from West End and walk with me around the Malcolm X parade. So that whole, and that's another thing that we have to think about as women, about how our body language is. Should we smile? Should we not smile? Would that put us in danger? Would it not put us in danger? And a funny flip side of this, again, when I was younger and in Europe and we went to Venice and we smiled, I was with my friend who was very dark and she was very heavy, and we would smile, you know, not knowing anything, walking down at the vendors, and they would see us and they would give us stuff, because they would come and say, "Ooh, we love your skin." And, you know, I was, my brother's wife was with us, and, you know, she was older and she was trying to tell these two young girls, stop smiling at these men because that means that they like you. But, you know, I'm like 17 or 18. I was like, oh, they're giving me this stuff. I'm going to smile at everybody. Hey, just walking, collecting, you know, things from there, you know. So, I mean, it's like a different experience. Not to say it was right, but I got a lot of good things.
Jamila, give us a closeout comment. What were you gonna say?
Oh, I didn't get to answer.
Oh,
I think. Well, I mean, I think the Jamaica was both great and difficult, having to stay there over. You know, I think I was there 10 months. So it was, my fantasy about Jamaica wasn't necessarily the reality. And like someone was saying, coming from the American South, I was really shocked to get there and see all these people who look like my cousins and uncles and aunties and stuff. Like, you're a Yankee? Because I don't like Yankees. You know, they weren't like, oh yeah, we're in this together. And I would say now, you know, I want to travel, and I know that I want to do this, you know, sort of Black history writ large, what I call on Twitter my Black History bucket list, hashtag Black History bucket list. So I seek that out ahead of time. So I would talk to somebody like Corrie or whatever. So for the Bahamas, I would advise people to follow on Facebook Ian Mara, EANMAURA, and take his Indaba tours of of Nassau.
Okay. Wait, say it again. I'm typing it in.
EANMAURA.
You say he's on Facebook?
And tell him I sent you, and it's Njemile, Njemile sent you, and take his Indaba tour.
That sounds great. I actually trying to go to, well, I've been, but I want to go back. And don't get me started on how much I do not like cruises. That's just me. But
no, I'm not gonna do another cruise.
Yeah, I'm just like, no. And so we went, but we didn't have time to meet people and really get into the culture. So
I can't get just the political issus around cruising. I just can't. I would
environmental for me. Environmental.
It's a lot. It's all, and like I said, I don't like to be around Americans. So how you gonna put me on a whole boat while I go? It's like a nightmare.
Okay.
Like, no, I want to be away from y'all. I want to be. They think I'm one of them without y'all. So
what were you gonna say?
I can trace all our problems back to boats. Okay, so I'm not trying to on one. I'm stay away from boats, but yeah.
So, Njemile, do you maybe we could talk just briefly as the end out, like, so since you were saying that your whole interest is the kind of Black History bucket list and like doing these tours. And we're going to do a tour next year.
Yep, to Savannah, Georgia.
Yes.
Yes.
And so it's kind of part of ending a workshop series that we're going to be talking about in the next month. And so you guys that are listening, then make sure you just kind of follow us on Facebook and on Instagram so you can hear about our workshop series. We're going to be talking about dealing with anti-Black racism and how do you create psychological wellness as you're dealing with that. And we're going to end it by going to Savannah, Georgia. And so you want to talk a little bit about that, Njamile?
Well, it's in progress. We're planning it, but in terms of we linked with a woman who gives Black History tours through our friend Masiki Scales, the musician. And you went? Did you go last week? Were you there last
week? I just came
this
back.
week. Oh, so you just got back. So you have been able to take her tour. I was only able to experience it online, filmed through Masiki. And we want to look at some of the landmarks and examine Savannah. I just read, has anybody read 400 Years? I'm sorry, 400 Souls. 400 Souls. By it's edited by Ibram Kendi and Keisha Blaine. But Dana Ramey Berry has a chapter in there where she interprets Savannah, Georgia as a site that is where African Americans' freedom dreams are embedded in the landscape. So I'm excited to look at Savannah through at least that lens. Yeah. And of course the High on the Hog lens.
Yeah. And then so part of what we were able to do on Tuesday, which is part of what we will take people on, is to go and look at the Weeping Time area. So they have only one little monument. For folks that don't know, the Weeping Time is the name that was given to the largest auction of enslaved Africans, and that happened in the United States, and that occurred in Savannah, Georgia. And so we saw the marker. She took me to that area. It's about a quarter of a mile from the actual place where the Africans were held in horse stables, which of course don't exist any longer. So, we're excited about this idea of travel and combining like leisure and pleasure and Black joy with also being able to understand history.
And, we do that as a family every year, just like the last thing. And one of the things that I find so rewarding, because, I take my mom. And my mom, like when I first got into college and I was on this Black stuff, and now she's being more receptive to it. So the last time we traveled, we actually went to the place where the first Juneteenth was, happened. And then when Black Lives Matter came out, not came out, but all the Juneteenth stuff started popping up, and Walmart was selling shirts. She started posting on her Facebook. She was like, "I've been to where it started," and this and she was just so proud to just like say that she'd been there and she'd been known about Juneteenth. Like she just learned about it 2 years prior, but she knew about it all this time, according to her. So
and
very good.
And as a note, cultural heritage tourism is like, particularly of sites between North Carolina and Georgia, is a $3 billion business.
Really?
And Black people, we need to start really getting into that, meaning owning the B&Bs and hotels, making sure we have history because we have the knowledge, right? Like we're the ones, because there are people who would love to do this every summer. Like if y'all wanted to run tours in Savannah or linking up ideas, there is a desperate need, but they want that combined with experiences with food, i.e. High on the Hog. They want it combined with other cultural experiences, especially if you can bring in the African piece and show, the continuity. So $3 billion, we need to get in on it. That's all I got to say.
I didn't even realize it was that much. The other thing is I was telling Corrie and Jamila about this Nozibele. I don't know if you realize there are actually barracoons in Savannah. So if you've ever been to Ghana or Senegal or Benin, any place where you had dungeons where they held enslaved Africans, and you've seen those holding pens, they have holding pens in Savannah. Now they got like a sign there that says that that's an African American legend that they were holding pens. But if you've been on the continent and you see the holding pens and you see those things, you know exactly what they are when you see them.
Wow.
So that'll be one of the things that we'll do next year is, take people to see it. So, all right, ladies. Yay! Thank you for this conversation about Black travel. Next month, we're doing the new Netflix film that's coming out. Gosh.
Which one?
Yeah.
How do they fall? How do they fall?
How do they fall? Oh, that should be fun. Yes.
Yeah.
The harder they come.
My husband.
Oh yeah, the harder they come. That's the next.
The harder they come. Okay.
The harder they come.
You already married.
I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I'll check with my husband.
Either the harder they come or the harder they fall, and then
the harder they come.
No, Jimmy Cliff is the harder they come. This is the harder they fall.
What's the name of your movie, Idris?
Wait, is it the harder they
not
fall?
his name.
The harder they come.
No, it's the harder they fall. The harder they come was Jimmy Cliff. Sorry, my bad.
Okay.
You can go look at that too. Set in Jamaica.
Yeah.
Millie's favorite place.
The harder they fall.
That's what he said. That's what he said.
Yeah. Love it. Love Jamaica.
Yeah.
It was just a cultural adjustment, a big cultural adjustment. Again, I learned a lot about myself.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
That's what travel does. We should have talked about that. How you learned about yourself.
Yeah. I think it's a healing experience. I think one of the most powerful healing experiences that you can have is traveling by yourself in a safe country, traveling by yourself, and particularly to a country where you don't speak the language.
Yeah.
You will get so humbled by that.
Yeah.
It's pretty powerful. Okay, so my last note is a little celebration because finally an enemy to Black women, R. Kelly, has been convicted. Yay! Y'all didn't seem as excited as I am, but anyway.
No, I am excited, girl.
It's just like,
happy.
Why did it take so long? It's so ridiculous.
I mean, it didn't take long, but what were you saying?
It took a long time. No, it took a long time, and it's such a fraught conversation because it is. And I was listening to when on the day that the conviction came down, a reporter talk about it, and they were pinpointing how this is really, really big because his victims were Black women. And it's documented that some of the victims said, I tried to report it, but who am I? I'm just a Black girl. Right. And so they're talking about that dimension of it. And then his defense, well, what you're doing is attacking me as a Black man. So I see a lot of people saying, okay, I see what this Me Too is. You all are going, it's just like everything else in the criminal justice system. You're going to attack the Black men and, let the white men go free. So I think that when I do think that there's something valid in that part of the conversation, which is the reporter never picked up that, okay, but you are, this is a victory, but this is a Black predator attacking Black women. Impress me and show some, also come down on white predators whose victims are solely Black women, because that is a part of the story. And we need to talk about all of that together. Yeah.
To Rosa Parks, who kind of started one of those battle.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's the lady's name who has a documentary on her? And Oprah talks about her.
It's a white girl.
No, it's a Black woman. And
I know you're talking about. I can't remember her name right now, but I know who.
I don't know why it slipped my mind.
With the doctor, she had to. Was that the one that was raped by the doctor?
Reese Taylor.
Yeah.
Reese Taylor. Yeah.
Reese Taylor.
What is it on?
I haven't seen it.
Taylor is the name of the documentary.
Name of the
No,
documentary.
but it's on Netflix or Prime or anything like that.
I think it was on like
Netflix.
Hulu. Not Hulu. It was on like Hoopla or like PBS or something like that. I got it.
Alethea said it's on Hulu.
I think it's also on Netflix.
Oh, maybe it's on Netflix. I think I got it from some library site.
Yeah.
Reese Taylor, I thought she was involved. The guy who attacked her was a doctor. He wasn't?
No. I saw that one. I know what you're talking about in Florida. Okay. I saw that one. When she was going to him. It was a white man who would take Black clients and he raped her, and she literally had a child.
Yeah,
he ended up in a mental institution for like 30 years. That's a separate. That's a separate
okay.
one.
Wow.
Yeah, and I
No,
can't remember
Reese
the name
Taylor
of
was
it.
walking home from church, and these
Oh yeah,
Oh
white
yeah.
men in a
Okay.
truck.
I know that. That's the story that Rosa Parks went after, and then they
Yeah.
Right.
dismissed it, or they didn't want to pursue it because she. What was it? There was something about
It was
her.
nothing about her. It was just that they didn't. It was just regular white men, and they didn't
Mhm.
think that it was a crime, right? Like
But there was some other
she
kind
tried
of
to make sexual assault and rape, an issue of the NAACP, right? Like something that they went after. But they were just saying how hard it is, to convict. They just said that is what was supposed to happen to you. Why were you outside, basically?
right.
Yeah, they didn't want to take on sexual cases of a
Yeah.
sexual nature. They just
But
did
I
not
think
want to do
wasn't
that.
there
That wasn't
something
their
about
thing.
her not being married? Like you got to look back at that because I was listening to the PBS.
She was-
and
she
there's
was-
another
she
little
was married.
unclear, nuanced.
No, the nuance is that Black women weren't seen as rapeable.
Right.
No, she was
We
married.
were sexually, she was
She was
married,
married.
and she was
And there was a girl
coming home from
before
church.
that. Then there's something. I'm gonna look back at it because there's a piece to that. So there's two women. So there's one that was raped, and she wasn't married, or something was going on. It was one of those kind of respectability things. So they didn't.
No, that's what
pursue
they
that.
said about Claudette Colvin, because she wasn't
Right.
married. But I don't. But that wasn't the result of rape. I don't think.
Yeah.
Her
I mean, and
pregnancy.
that was their long-standing tradition. They said the NAACP did not take on cases of sexual nature. And it wasn't their thing.
That's
Well,
crazy.
anyway, so I was just intending to say like, yay, that this man is convicted. And I realized like when we were talking earlier that I was like, oh, okay, I need to do something around this because I think it's important to talk about the ways in which Black women, the people that our pain is dismissed, that this historic idea that we can't be raped, that, it takes so long for people to be convicted. And, even this sense, like you were saying, Njamile, this idea that we should have some obligation to Black men over our own personal safety. I think those are important things. And then even grooming behavior. And so we were talking about that earlier, and all the ways in which we get groomed, that we see. And I'm talking about society. So when I'm saying we, I'm like all of us, the ways in which that we are groomed to normalize things, and people don't see it as like red flags and problematic. Because when I was actually talking to my staff earlier, and they're younger than us, and so I was asking them if they, he's calling himself the Pied Piper of Soul, and I was like, do y'all know the story of the Pied Piper? And none of them knew the story of the Pied Piper. And I'm like, if you don't know the story of the Pied Piper, then you missed this big thing. This man is telling you who he is.
But he said that. And if you ever get a chance, like Sparkle, the singer, who is the one whose niece
busted it all out. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So she lost her whole family behind that, behind trying to protect the niece, her parents and the niece, who was 14 at the time, all this. Her mother refused to talk to her for like 20 years behind R. Kelly. So they felt like it was perfectly okay what he did, even though they could see this man on tape, degrading their 14-year-old child. And they still did not talk to Sparkle. They wouldn't let her come along. When she came in, when she finally made up with her mother, her sister, and the brother-in-law, the child's parents would leave out the door. I was like, if that is not accepting, it is beyond the Pied Piper. You could see the tape. You can hear what everybody said. All this testimony. And you still were like, no, we would rather stay with this man than my sister, who tried to protect her and everybody else. So anyway,
we could go on a whole other thing. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Nozibele.
No, I was just saying that's crazy. To me, it's just
she's like, I was saying this for 20 years. 20 years.
I mean, I was saying I have been since Aaliyah. I remember I was still in California when that Aaliyah thing. I still lived in California, And I remember from that moment that I heard that, I disliked R. Kelly. I ain't listening to them songs, the Believe I Can Fly, the Bump Bump, or whatever the foolishness that he was singing. I've always disliked R. Kelly, and I always felt marginalized because I was like, don't play that music. I don't want to hear. I'm not dancing. I'm not shaking. This man is a demon. He's a predator. He is an enemy to Black women. And I just remember always feeling like, okay, you know, like, there's something wrong with me because I can't get on the program and be okay with this man.
Yeah. And the thing that really concerns me is because I brought it up a couple of days ago. I went out with some girlfriends and I was like, yay, R. Kelly got convicted. And one of them said, well, say what you want. I still like R. Kelly. And I was like, why? I was like, all these things that he did, I still like his music. You have to separate the man from the music. I say, no, you don't, because everything is right there in his lyrics, you know, and, you know, by buying his music and supporting his music, you are giving him money to oppress and support women when he was doing it, when you know, were continuing to do that. So I don't understand. I really don't understand.
So
and it was like, maybe they want it and maybe they do. I was like, you don't know.
Oh, no, you don't have to justify it like that. But I feel like we do need to have that conversation, that Mad at Miles, as I call it, conversation, because there are a lot of things where, especially in hip hop, especially for these people who are young, you know, they listen to people in prison right now, right? Like, I forgot what some of my students were saying. I got this guy's name is like Young something, but he's in prison. Just let's put it that way. But it's like all these people. I mean, even Tupac was brought, like, you know, we're talking about people who go to jail, convicted of sexual assault, that, you know, Mike Tyson, whomever else, right? Like, literally people who rape people, you know, being convicted of it, but yet we still make them our heroes. And there could be some kind of thing as well, like legitimately, if they've gone to jail and served their time, we can have conversations about this idea, because prison abolition does mean that. Like, we don't throw people away. We do have to believe that they can be part of our society. So,
well, I mean, it's a fraud. It's such a fraud conversation, right? If we're gonna have it, like, we can't have it at the tail end of this. That's why I wasn't
sorry,
like,
but
no, it's not you. We should
conversation.
come back to it because my daughters, you know how we rear our daughters, and my daughters were like, well, you said all that stuff about Chris Brown and R. Kelly, but you still up here jamming to what's the lady's name who has a son by Angie Stone. And she said, and she admitted to punching her daughter in the mouth and knocking several of her teeth out.
Oh, yeah.
And she was like,
Nina Simone was a mess.
Yeah,
Like,
Marvin Gaye.
I had a conversation this
right?
morning with Titi. We listened to Mississippi Goddamn on the way to school, and I had to fill her in on Nina Simone.
But it's like, you're right. Okay, let's do a stop. We can continue.
Okay,
I gotta go. But that is a conversation that we need to have.
Back to this because it's clearly like this is a conversation that we need to have. We need to be talking about Black women's sexual assault and grooming behaviors in the community. So, all right, take care, y'all. Thank you.
See y'all later.
Bye.